Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try to do a tutorial today on our little mug rug and help you get through this. See if you can make one, and if you can't, just shoot me a message and I'll help you through it. These are some of the things that we are going to need. You're going to have to go to Creative Kiwi and download this design. It comes in 3 sizes. So the one I'm doing today is I believe the 5x7 size, but you pick whatever size you want to do. And this is a free design, and I'll put a link right to the design in the opening comments for the tutorial. Then print off all the pages. There's quite a few pages, and each page are step-by-step instructions on how to do this. This is an in the hoop project, and so we're going to just be following along one step after the other and till we're finished and we have something pretty that we can share. That does call for hooping 2 layers of water-soluble stabilizer. So here I have, this is my jumbo hoop. For those of you who have the midi or the maxi hoop, you won't need to do this. When I got my machine, I bought 2 extra hoops, the mega and the jumbo, and I skipped the other 2. It was just too much money for me, and I use my jumbo hoop all the time. There's about this much space in my jumbo hoop that I cannot access because I have the 770. But I can do anything I want in a jumbo hoop. I have done many embroideries, and losing just 1.5 inches or 1 3/4 inches here is nothing to me. It calls for 2 layers. This is Vilene water-soluble stabilizer, and it's kind of a woven thing. And it's very thin, and so I stitched these together so that they won't shift on me. I just stitched a little line around, and then I'll overlap them and just stitch them together. And because it's so thin and I'm using my jumbo hoop, I have put pins, after I hooped it, I put pins all around the top of my hoop. Sometimes I use T-pins for this. Today I just used quilting pins. But then I burped my hoop and got it tight. I pulled everything tight. And this way, I don't have to put anything sticky on my hoop or wrap my hoop with anything, because the next time I might not want that. It's easy to take the pins in and out, and my stabilizer is not going to move from the tension of having been sewn on it. So I hope that makes sense to you. So then the pattern calls for some lightweight fleece, and this is Thermolam Plus. It is not fusible. It's a very thin fleece that's used mainly for clothing, placemats, coasters, things like that. You're going to need some painter's tape. You'll need 3 pieces of fabric. This is your frame fabric, this is your central fabric, and this is your little sewing machine. So when you pick your fabric, you don't have to do exactly like mine. Do your own colors and have fun with it. But for your frame fabric, you'll need to have a pretty good size piece so you can use the same on the back, because this is going to be completely lined, and so you'll need a piece big enough for the base piece for the front and a whole piece for the back. And the pattern calls for some lightweight fusible interfacing, and I think this is PF 144. And it's just a very light fusible on one side interfacing, and the pattern says they want you to fuse this to the back, the inside back, to give it stability. So that's what we need to get started, and I'll go get my hoop in my machine and get my design pulled up, and we will start stitching. I know we've probably talked about this before, but I guess it doesn't hurt to review now and then. So I have my design pulled up, and again I have the 770, and this is what your screen looks like if you're using the jumbo hoop. Because of the harp size of the 770, I can only access all but about 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches of my jumbo hoop, which is perfectly fine for me. I have never regretted getting it, and I have never run into a problem with it. And since I am kind of a right brain, left brain person, I would be completely confused stitching this out this way. I need things to look like they're going the right direction, so I'm going to hit my little eye icon and I am going to rotate my design. And I'm going to turn it 90 degrees and 90 degrees again, and now to my brain it's going the right direction. So I'm going to go ahead and send it to my machine now. I haven't actually sent it to the machine yet, but I'll touch the needle and it's going to pull my arm over, and it's asking me to put down, pinch in and put down. So it's asking me for the hoop. So there are a couple different screens you'll see with your hoops, and this particular one is asking for the hoop. So you can see that I have answered the machine's request and added my hoop. Your machine will ask you for things all the time. It's always important if you run into some sort of roadblock to look at the screen and study it through. Your machine might be asking you for something. And my machine is asking me for something now. It wants to calibrate the hoop and center it. So I'm going to go ahead and use my stylus and touch my check mark, and my machine will move the hoop real quick and pull up my design. And now I'm ready to do my first round of stitching. It seems to me that there can be an awful lot of waste in what we do with our machine embroidery, and people don't seem to mind, but I have been a quilter for about 54 years, and I have never been able to waste fabric or anything else. I'm a very conservative, simplistic living person, and I just don't have the ability to throw a lot of things out that could be saved. So when I get ready to do an in the hoop embroidery like this, I use my best press. I have my fabric ready and I use my best press and I give it just a little shot of that. And I have a little row into iron that I love, and I will iron and best press just one corner. And when I put this in my hoop and I get ready, when the pattern calls for the fabric, I'm only going to lay it in there with this corner where it needs to stitch. There'll be a die line. You'll see that coming up. And I'm going to conserve as much of this big piece of fabric as I can. For one reason, I need another big piece of it for the back. So that's something to think about. You don't have to get a big piece of fabric and then have this be the middle. You can have this be the middle. It's just off to the side, and you'll save all the rest of this fabric for another fun project. Okay, we're ready to get started, and what we talked about in the first part of this tutorial was that you have downloaded your design and you have printed off the PDF instructions, and there are several pages. I don't know how many, I think 10 or something. So print those all off, You'll see all this information of the things you need on the top page and a picture of the design. And we get started here. Step 1. Load your design. We've done that. Hoop 2 layers of water-soluble stabilizer. I used a Vilene. We've done that. Thread your machine with a neutral color. So just here I'm going to stop and show you the colors that I'm going to be using. I'm going to use black, red, and gold. And that's because I love these little tea-stained country design look type things. And this is the one I stitched out to photograph for you to see what we would like to do with the something fun to do for August. And I decided ahead of time my color placement. So even though the pattern calls for a neutral color to do your die line, I'm going to use black because I decided to do black all around the outside edge. And so if I used a light color or something neutral, it might show through. So I am going to do my die line with black. And looking back over now at our directions, I threaded my machine with black and stitch color 1, the outline of the coaster, although what we're doing is a mug rug. And here you can see she's used a dark thread so you can see it in the photograph. And I have my design pulled up. I'm ready to start stitching. My machine's waiting for me to push the go button. And I have my bobbin thread pulled up, and it's going to stitch a die line for my first step. And a die line is kind of like a placement line. You can see where to put things. You can see how big of a piece of fabric you need for the frame fabric we talked about. This also kind of gives you an idea of how big your other pieces of fabric might need to be. So we'll stitch this die line around, and then we'll be right back. This is going to go all the way around and back to the beginning, and it'll stop, and then it'll ask me for step 2. So I just finished stitching the die line. You can see that here. It went around, all the way around, came back to the beginning and stopped. And my pattern, or my directions, the next step says to place batting and frame fabric over the guideline that I just stitched. And then it asks me to stitch color 2. Color 2 is going to do quite a bit of roaming around, and it's going to stitch down several things. So you can see my highlighted blue lines here on my screen. These are where it's going to stitch. And don't worry if it goes off just a little bit right here. It's the bottom of the little sewing machine. So, you know, some people might see that and think, oh my word, my design's wrong, or there's a glitch, but there isn't. It'll be all right. So now I'm going to try to one-handedly bring up my bobbin thread. I don't know if I can do it with one hand, but I'll sure give it a try. And I don't recommend that you, and I'm not left-handed either, I don't recommend that you ever get your fingers anywhere near the needle. Just stay out of that area altogether, and you'll always be safe. You see these awful pictures. Okay, now we're going to stitch around, and it's going to go around a couple of times. And this is going to go right over the die line that we just stitched. And I do kind of sort of smooth my fabric, but I don't go anywhere near my needle or the workings of the machine. It just isn't worth it. Always keep your fingers completely out and away. so I got my two lines stitched around. This was step 2. Nice and pretty. And now I have a green highlight on my screen, and it's time to stitch the outline of the little sewing machine and put the inner fabric down. So let's look at our directions. Now it says, place your inner fabric over the guideline. That's the second line that we stitched just now, and stitch color 3. So since I know I'm going to be doing some red stitching then let me show you here on my, see I have red stitching around mine. I have switched threads. So I'm on my red thread now. So if you want to switch threads, if you have a different color, you can. And I'm going to hurry quick and get my inner fabric all set. And this I do just like I did my frame fabric. Do a little best press on there and get it nice and ready to go. And I'm just going to do exactly like I did before. I'm going to try to do this with one hand. I don't know if I can do it, but I'll try. I'm going to try to conserve fabric and just use the corners. See, I have a great big piece of fabric here. So I should have just cut off a little spot. And this is interesting. I have a stripe. So I don't want my stripes going this way or that way. I want them going nice and straight. So I'm going to sort of eyeball it toward the back and the front, and maybe do just a little adjusting. And one-handedly again, I will try to pull up my bobbin thread and snag my tweezers here. And remember to always keep your fingers away. Ending up in the emergency room is not allowed. Bernina does not allow that. Okay, so I'm going to start my machine, and we'll do my little sewing machine on here, and I shall be back with the next step. Okay, so we've got our inner fabric down, and I have trimmed on mine all the way, and the next step is to place your sewing machine fabric over the guideline of the little sewing machine. You'll be able to see it here on mine. I've got it all trimmed out, and I have pressed my sewing machine fabric, my red, and I've got my red thread in there, and I'll get this all smoothed out. And I've pulled up my bobbin thread a little bit ahead of time here, save us a little trouble. I'm going to straighten my fabric out just a little more. And now we're ready to go ahead and stitch down our sewing machine fabric. So here we go. See that on my screen. My next step is going to be to do some satin stitching all the way around the machine and around the inner fabric. So let's check our directions. I always want to follow in order. So we've stitched color 4, so we're ready. And that's going to ask us to cut away the excess fabric from around the sewing machine. So we'll do that, and then we'll start our satin stitching. Alright, we got our sewing machine stitched down and trimmed. Got our background fabric and our frame fabric on. We're doing pretty good. Next step tells us to continue with stitching color 5, which zigzags the fabric all around the edges. So that's what this is. This is actually a decorative stitch that will come a little bit later, but this is going to stitch this down and cover those raw edges. So don't worry if you didn't get them trimmed just perfectly. This is a pretty wide stitch, and I usually try to trim within 1/8 of an inch, but if you don't make it, don't worry about it. This is just something fun to do, and you should be enjoying your beautiful sewing machine. So I'm all ready to stitch. I've got my bobbin thread pulled up, and I'm going to go ahead and do my zigzags. If you want to have some fun with color, all you have to do is just press your start and stop button, and you can switch colors of thread anywhere in a design. Just because it tells you to use a neutral color, or you see on your screen that it's going to stitch out the same color in a place where you would rather have a different color, you just stop and switch colors. And since I'm using kind of a country red, I'm using a smoky colored thread in my bobbin, because I know that I'm going to edge this in black, and everything else is going to be hidden under the lining. So the only part of my bobbin that you will see is just that outer edging. I'll show you the back. That way you can see. Nothing shows but the outer edging. So I'm just using a kind of a dark brown smoky color. And I always use 60 weight thread in my bobbin and 40 weight embroidery thread on top. I'm using a 9014 needle. I cleaned and oiled my machine, filled the bobbin, put in a new needle before I started, and that way I get to enjoy my whole stitching experience, and I don't have to stop and do anything in the middle or have any problems. So this will go ahead and stitch all the way around, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, we're ready for our next step. And the next step tells me to change my thread to my chosen colors. It does have some suggested colors here, but you can use whatever you want. So we're ready for color 6, and that's the quilting. And that is these little quilting lines here on the inside of the frame fabric. So I have pulled up my bobbin thread already, and I'm ready to do the step 6, the quilting. My machine tells me that this is going to take 3 minutes. You can always kind of see where you're at here. With 3 minutes, you have 86 minutes remaining to finish. And I don't have my machine set going very fast. Just maybe quilting. And we'll be back and we'll go to the next step.